So, Michael, like, tell me the 1 minute version of how Ericsson is tied in
Mhm.
with, uh, essentially, with funding countries and organizations that participate in terrorism.
Right. So Ericsson is a telecommunications company that's a foreign company. And essentially, they handle a very important process that's normally handled by other third party servicers, what are considered trusted groups or trust groups. And these very important servicers are basically who port your number over when you're dialing out to either 911, or when you're providing funding to Haiti for hurricane relief. These are the in between companies that do a lot more than what we are as a public and as a people understanding and comprehending. So it's very interesting because in February of 2022, we heard in this same time frame, we've heard a lot about Russia. We've heard a lot about Ukraine. Heard a lot about a lot of things that don't really pertain to us and affect us directly. What we have heard nothing about is Ericsson and the insane amount of connections that they've had with their misdeeds and misdealings through bribing ISIS, and that dates between the years of 2000 and 2017. What's even more interesting, and what I think is more important and more imperative, is that the reporting that we're being able to provide, the information we're able to cover, is based on an internal investigation that was done by Ericsson themselves. And so
just to kind of clarify here, essentially the evidence you're presenting is all based upon internal documents of Ericsson. So none of this stuff is guessing or conspiracy or whatever.
This is fact, and the fact that it is true is honestly the most troubling thing. The fact that it will connect to Durham and a lot of what's going to be coming out in the very near future, a lot of what is already out, is even more damning. But the job of people like us and other journalists is to get this information out and allow people to be able to break it down and understand how it directly ties and affects them. And we'll go over that, I think, as we continue to go through this thread. So it wouldn't be so terrible if there wasn't already an investigation that was done through the Justice Department, and that was in 2019. But the real reason why that's so damning is because Ericsson was essentially enabled through politicians, our State Department, the SEC, Southern District of New York, which is very corrupt, as well as other institutions that are supposed to literally be there to protect us and have our best interest at heart. They swear an oath to protect and, carry out the Constitution as written, and they're not doing that. So it'd be one thing if it was just one occurrence, but with Ericsson, it's a troubling occurrence that involves schemes, bribes, payments, illicit funding, and speaking fees to Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton and Obama looking the other way, the SEC questioning them, and then asking them through financial documents and records, why aren't you disclosing the fact that you're doing business with, companies and in countries where the State Department has listed and named them as a state sponsor of terrorism. So am I covering a little bit of it or covering too much?
No, that's great. That's great. So take us down that road. Tell us a little bit about how they're connected to groups that are essentially terrorist groups.
So the SEC submits a letter to Ericsson September 29th, 2010. That's here and highlighted, and there's a link to the SEC archives where you can read the whole entire SEC filing. But what's specifically stated to Ericsson on September 29th, 2010 is that, as you know, Cuba, Iran, Sudan, and Syria are countries that are identified by the U.S. Department of State as state sponsors of terrorism and are subject to U.S. economic sanctions and export controls. We note that your Form 20F does not include disclosures regarding contacts with Cuba, Iran, Sudan, and Syria. So what this specific filing shows is that the SEC knew, not hypothetically speaking, not literally speaking, that they're not disclosing the businesses that they're undertaking in those countries that are state sponsors of terrorism. Does that make sense?
So tell us a little bit about that business. You were telling me some specifics before about how they were funneling money to certain organizations. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So again, this is based off of the ICIJ's internal investigation. Again, based off of documents that this investigation was done by Ericsson. The reason they were allowed to do these, to carry this out essentially, is because under the State Department, under Obama as well as Hillary, they looked the other way, right? Regarding different forms of, hold on, let me go back to the thread. So you had sanctions, right? The sanctions came from Hillary, State Department, as well as Obama executive orders. And rather than prevent Iran, even though the SEC knew and the State Department via an investigation knew that Ericsson was dealing with terrorists as well as Iran, Hillary and Bill essentially was paid $750,000 to his Clinton Foundation, and they looked the other way, right? So it just so happens to be that Ericsson, as time passes, continues to illicitly be involved in more and more corrupt and criminal acts. And so we wouldn't even know about these things if the leaks didn't happen. Does that, am I tracking with that properly?
Yeah, totally. And somewhere here, I don't know when you want to show it, but that video you showed earlier was very
I don't know if the sound's going to play, but yeah, I would highly suggest that everybody go to the thread and just listen to this 2-minute clip because it pertains to the video Clinton cash. And so it mentions how insanely corrupt the Clintons are. I think a lot of people understand and know that. But to know and understand and comprehend that the Justice Department delayed and deferred their response to Ericsson, even under Trump, right? Now, obviously, they were investigating Trump through the Southern District of New York, so he really couldn't get involved because they were investigating his tax returns, as well as a bunch of other very criminal things that the Southern District of New York does. But this is an actual case in which we have financial documents, disclosures, and evidence that they're literally working for the others, the enemy.
Over here, I like to pause a minute to show this Clinton cash video. It's a 2-minute video that explains a lot of what Michael is talking about.
You will never contribute to an organization that will give you a higher probability of having your good intentions turn into real positive changes in other people's lives. That will give you a better chance than what you've done here tonight.
His single biggest speech payday came from the Swedish telecom company Ericsson. And it's a very, very unusual and troubling story.
Now, Ericsson is a Swedish telecom company that in 2009 and 2010 was in trouble with Hillary Clinton's State Department because Ericsson was selling a lot of telecom equipment to Iran, to Belarus, and to other oppressive governments, about which the State Department was concerned. Ericsson risked being put on a list by the federal government in the United States for trading with an enemy state. There was actually an effort being put forward in Washington to broaden Iranian sanctions to include the very technologies that Ericsson was selling to the Iranian government. So it's against this background
that Ericsson decided now might be a good time to hire Bill Clinton to give a speech.
They had never paid for a speech by him before, and they decided to go in big, $750,000 for a single speech. 7 days after he gave that speech, Hillary's State Department came out with a statement which said, "We are not going to broaden sanctions on Iran to include technologies like telecom. We're going to rely and expect companies like Ericsson to police themselves."
It was a massive win for Ericsson. Ericsson was able to avoid having to deal with a regulatory battle in Washington, giving up contracts that were highly lucrative in these countries, and being put on a list that would create an enormous diplomatic problem for them, all because essentially they paid Bill Clinton to give a speech for $750,000.
Will you continue to give speeches?
Oh, yeah. I got to pay our bills.
These are treasonous acts. And so getting that information out there and getting this information to people in the form of a report that's tangible and isn't hyperbole or assumptive in any sort of way. It's not conspiracy, it's fact. is really important. So what we're trying to do with Plus Ultra is get these reports, essentially action reports, get them out in front of the people, and then allow people to essentially take those reports to their congressman and anyone running for office, and essentially, in a way, hold them accountable by allowing them to read the report.
Now, tell us a little bit about some of the actual funneling of money, how it was occurring, what they were saying it was.
So I'm just going to go based off of what the internal report through ICIJ alleges and obviously shows. But what it states, let me get down to the lower part just a second here. So here's a basically summary of what they found, key findings, right? So the Ericsson list reveals that the Swedish telecom giant sought permission from the terrorist group known as the Islamic State to work in an ISIS-controlled city and paid to smuggle equipment into ISIS areas on a route known as the Speedway. Ericsson made tens of millions of dollars in suspicious payments over nearly a decade to sustain its business in Iraq, financing slush funds, trips abroad for defense officials, and payoffs through middlemen to corporate executives and possibly terrorists. The telecom giant relied on politically connected fixers and unvetted subcontractors, sham contracts, inflated invoices, falsified financial statements, and payments to consultants with nebulous job descriptions as part of its business dealings in Iraq. Ericsson presided over corrupt conduct in Iraq even after it had acknowledged in 2013 that it was cooperating with U.S. authorities investigating bribery allegations elsewhere. The U.S. probe, and this is very key, the U.S. probe, which does not mention Iraq, resulted in a $1 billion bribery settlement in 2019. So to encapsulate this point even more, this means that the State Department knew, the SEC knew, U.S. authorities investigating Ericsson knew, the State Department under Hillary Clinton specifically knew and did not sanction specifically this company, Ericsson. So in doing so, the executive order that Obama passes that essentially says nobody can do business in these areas pertaining to Syria and Iran, and that it pertains to telecommunications companies, more so internet service providers. But that's another part of what we're going to be tackling with the whole Durham probe, the illicit abuse of the difference, which really there is no difference aside from a technical difference between voice over internet protocol, which is what we're interacting over right now, and like a cell phone to cell phone contact, right? One's happening over telecoms between cell providers, and you're beaming out to a signal and, a satellite tower, or cell tower. And then the cell tower beams signal to whoever you're calling, the phone number you're calling. The other iteration is voice over internet protocol, which happens over different packets of data flowing over the internet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Tell us a little bit about how and in what terms some of this money was being given to ISIS and what it was supposed to be aimed for.
So the best way to put it is like, this is what's documented too, right? So you have to understand that like the real way that terrorists and the real, not that I am any expert on these matters, but if you think about it, when you're trying to pay someone to do something illicit or illegal, you don't want them a paper trail, right? So that's what makes gangs like MS-13 and gangs specifically, specifically in ISIS, right? That's what makes them such a good way for basically corrupt politicians and corrupt entities to have different tasks carried out, right? If, let's say, an organization in an intelligence agency, if you want to have somebody, let's just say, murdered, right? Pretty extreme case, but they do it all the time. You're not going to hire someone that's a part of your agency or entity. You're going to get someone from off the streets, and you're going to hire them, and you're going to establish a little relationship between the two of you. And then, later on down the line, once they become a liability or they start to catch on too much to what you're doing, you just have those two people killed. This is exactly what happened with the Seth Rich situation. But that's here nor there. At the end of the day, this is an actual investigation that where normally you wouldn't have criminal culpability for the actions that they've taken. In this case, we have that. And so the question essentially becomes, how long do we look the other way? And at what point is enough enough? You have, for example, how many companies, corporations, and entities decided just because Russia is the worst thing since sliced bread, we're going to literally disable any Russian, period, no matter what you actually have done. We're going to make it so no Russian can actually conduct business, even if you're a Russian American. So, for example, myself, I'm a Lebanese American, right? So if I'm Russian American, does that mean I can't use these services like PayPal and, public utilities because of a nation state leader and what the nation state leader did? Whether you agree or don't agree with what Russia's doing, whether you agree or don't agree with what any nation state is doing, the idea that we're going to hold a whole people responsible for what their nation state leader is doing, honestly, I think that's insane. But that's here nor there. The only reason I say it's insane is because on the same token, here we have this company in Ericsson doing business with literal terrorists. And then because of the enabling by the Justice Department, because of the enabling by Obama, because of the enabling by the State Department, this important company gets this contract that handles your 911 services. So talk about false flags. They're literally handling the signal that sits in between you and when you have the most urgent emergency where you really need someone to help you. They're controlling that. And what's mind-boggling is that literally we've allowed this to happen, and things that have progressed throughout time, like the NSA Snowden leaks, while people think that that's been an informative leak and that we were provided proper understanding of what Snowden was doing, what Snowden didn't leak was the information on these third-party contractors that sit in between the telecoms. And I'm kind of firing off here because I'm a little this subject kind of makes me mad. But the truth of the matter is, while everyone thought what Snowden did was heroic, look how Snowden is treated and compare that to Julian Assange, who's a real hero, right? You look at the two of them, and it couldn't be any more drastically different how the two of them were treated. And so that's part of what I go over in the thread, and that's kind of where I'm leading to next is November 28th, 2010, you have the U.S. diplomatic cables leak. And so they're widely known as Cablegate, part of a series known as Plus D. December 1st, 2010, Amazon kicks WikiLeaks off of their servers. So the U.S. Department of Homeland Security says, we're not down with what was just leaked through WikiLeaks. So Amazon, do us a solid because you're basically the CIA. Kick WikiLeaks off your servers, please. Amazon obliges and then blames it all on the terms of service, right? Well, we didn't really kick them off. Our terms of service indicate that if you have data that doesn't belong to you, then we can't host your data. Yet Amazon Web Services has no problem hosting all of the CIA's data, as well as all the illicit documentation and evidence and information in their cloud, but yet they had to kick Julian Assange and WikiLeaks off their servers. So this is an interesting timeline because what Julian specifically mentions on the day of those leaks is that he says he wants to expose China and Russia just as much as the US. None of these things get reported. None of it gets covered. In fact, the United States congressmen indicate that Julian Assange should be droned and killed. In many instances, Hillary specifically calls for his droning, and then she says how she was joking about it. But anyways, December 2nd, Interpol office in Gothenburg, Sweden, issues a fresh arrest warrant for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. So then you're looking at Sweden, a country that essentially has funneled $26 million, 26 to 30 million, to the Swedish arm of the Clinton Foundation. Specifically the Swedish Clinton Foundation. It's a very odd name to pronounce, so I'm not going to try to. And then December 2nd, you have Interpol office in Gothenburg issues a fresh arrest warrant for Julian's arrest. So when you're looking back at these things, you kind of say to yourself, that's coincidental. And then Ericsson's a Swedish company, and somehow Ericsson's avoiding all these sanctions. They're avoiding all this illicit activity that they're clearly being caught doing and that the government has known about since 2010. And in every instance, the State Department, the Justice Department, the SEC, the IRS, Every state institution, every government institution absolutely failed the American people, specifically as well now affecting other people overseas, like my family overseas, as well as your family overseas. So I know I'm running on here, but just so people understand, like right now in Lebanon, I have family that doesn't have access to power. Garbage sits in the streets. The bank failed about 2 years ago, the central bank. So all my family members who have hundreds of thousands of dollars in their bank accounts right now cannot access that money. And they're literally told, basically, in no impolite words, sorry, get fucked. Like, the money's not there. So meanwhile, the politicians in Lebanon, which are enabled through a terrorist organization, which I know you're very familiar with, in Hezbollah is basically allowed to move and funnel money amongst the politicians in parliament in Lebanon unfettered, right? No problem if you've got millions of dollars in the bank. But if you're someone who's very poor and at the bottom and you don't have money, sorry, that 200,000, that's gone. The money that you saved up your whole entire career, whole entire life to put your kids through college, whatever it might have been, doesn't really matter what the reason. That money's not available to you. But, oh, by the way, the terrorists that do business like Ericsson, they're okay. They can continue to move money. And the politicians, they can continue to move money. But you, the people, sorry, you're shit out of luck. So anyhow, the reason why that connects is because Ericsson was also involved and specifically connected to Lebanon. So there were illicit practices in all of these different countries, being Iraq, Spain, Portugal. The list just goes on and on and on. And so this matters because if we can't start in the United States with holding this corporation accountable, and we just allow them to continue to operate our 911 emergency services, what happens when the next 9/11 takes place? And, of course, you're not going to be able to actually prove specifically whether they did or didn't port your number over, but they're able to put your name on a list along with your number on a list where everybody except for the people on this list suddenly can't access the signal from this time to this time. And if you think that can't happen, just watch a simple documentary like 0 Days, which is an internally done documentary pertaining to the NSA, pertaining to the capabilities, as well as specifically the Iran attack of Stuxnet. And why that matters so much is because it's these people, these corrupt assholes, in their own words, kind of sort of bragging. The film was recorded, I think, sometime in like 2013 to 2016. It wasn't finally put out until sometime in 2016. But the point is that they explain to you how through different variations of cyber warfare and cyber espionage, how they're able to literally make a nuclear facility in Natanz, Iran, just combust. Essentially, the machinery just breaks, and through proper coding and through proper malware, even though Natanz is a facility that is not connected to the internet from the outside world. So if you can kind of conceptualize what I'm explaining or trying to explain, you don't need a direct connection to alter results or alter what's happening. And so if you conceptualize that and you allow yourself to really try to really realize the capabilities of the CIA and what they can do, you'll start to understand that, holy shit, they can alter anything they want, and they do it through the internal code, and they do it through internal connections between different computers. And I'll go into some of that in additional detail. But I've probably covered just quite a bit now. You probably have a lot of questions. So
yeah, let me ask you, could you tell us exactly how Ericsson connects to our 911 calls and what subsidiaries of Ericsson are involved in this? Kind of tie it all together for us so it all makes sense here.
Right. So the subsidiary is iConnective, right? It was rebranded in 2013, coincidentally the same exact time that the FCC under Obama awards the local number portability administrator contract. It puts it up for bid. The two companies, and so I'm going to mention this other company because they're very important and we'll cover them in the future, but Neustar is the first company, right? Neustar has currently indicted currently indicted Michael Sussman. And in the indictment, listed in the indictment, is Internet Company One, which is Neustar Incorporated. So Neustar holds this number portability contract for over 17 years. Neustar is a spinoff of Lockheed Martin, And the interesting thing about Newstar is specifically it's a government agency created entity. And so why that's so important is because Newstar was created through security clearances that gives privy access to lawyers like Michael Sussman, a cybersecurity lawyer with a top security clearance. So when you allow lawyers who have access, privy access, I should say, to manipulate documentation and literal evidence based on hearsay, it takes the system and completely flips it on its head. So what's going to come out through a lot of what's coming with the Durham indictment is people are going to start to realize that what happened specifically pertaining to Rodney Joffe. So I'm trying to explain a lot here, but I'm going to try to do my best in summarizing it. So when you ask specifically about the subsidiary was Telcordia Technologies. They basically sit in the same data center that AT&T, which is the Baby Bells corporations, they sit in the same data center as that corporation. So it's probably hard to explain right now as I don't have a lot pertaining to AT&T and the come up of iConnective and all that. But essentially, Telcordia Technologies, which is Ericsson, rebrands itself as iConnective. And iConnective is the company that is awarded this numbers portability contract, Telcordia Technologies. The reason why that's so damning is because in 2013, you had for 16 years, I believe, Newstar was handling this number portability job. So the transferring of your number from you dialing out to 911, the process of your cell number being ported over to the emergency services. So that job is done by that third-party servicer, and those two companies are Newstar and Telcordia. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And I kind of reiterated a lot there, but the best way to put it is Ericsson owns Telcordia. They were sold. So the even more interesting thing, and I'll just note this really quick. The same company that created and funded CrowdStrike also funded and created Telcordia, also created and funded Newstar. So, and all in the same time frame, around 2011, those companies do a little bit of a musical chairs, right? So you go from a domestically owned corporation in Newstar, and you switch over to a foreign subsidiary of Ericsson. So now, if you think about it from a data perspective, even though that data that may be flowing through those satellites or flowing through those that infrastructure, even though that data may be you, a U.S. domestic citizen, being recorded, now it's flowing through foreign company. So now, is that data foreign or is it domestic data? Well, that's all down to the interpretation of the lawyer and what the lawyer decides and chooses. And if you can imagine, these lawyers are corrupt as shit, and they do whatever the intelligence services request.
So, could you show us any of the documents that state that Ericsson was making payoffs to ISIS?
So, I mean, we could go through a lot of that, but a lot of that's going to be through their own. So it's through their own internal investigations. The idea, based on what we're trying to do with Plus Ultra, is to get people to come together collectively and put these reports out that get us the real information that's going to really pertain and matter. Right now, that information is probably going to be with the Justice Department. The idea, though, is they obviously knew through what I've shown you so far. To go over it specifically email by email would probably be really boring. So I tried to summarize as much as I could. And so you also have this Justice Department fine, which pertains to a lot of information that I'll open right now. Like the best way to put it is the corruption has been rampant and it's very well documented. So I guess the best way to explain, in further videos that we do or further interviews, we can present more of the information pertaining to the emails and specifically how. But the ICIJ is a very good organization, and they do a lot of internal connections and data analysis on information. It's a huge consortium of journalists that come together to put this information out. So realistically, we'll have to continue doing this as well and essentially stop taking the corporation's word for it, right? Because the corporation, if they're allowed to investigate themselves, I mean, like your job as a corporation, you don't have an interest to the people. You have an interest to your bottom line. You have an interest to the corporation, right? The whole point of a corporation is to limit liability. So if all the corporation's entire purpose is to continue enabling the structure of a corporation, then all it's going to do is look out for itself. It's not going to have any interest or care whatsoever for what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
An example would be Enron, right? An example would be Enron. The Enron scandal happens. Billions of dollars are funneled. All the bankers, all the insiders get away with it, except for the one guy at the top, the fall guy, essentially. But in many cases, a lot of people involved in the involved in the Enron scandal, a lot of the bigger names, a lot of the bigger people, they actually got away with it scot-free. White collar crimes, right? 300 billion here, 300 million there. Like, meanwhile, all these people at the bottom of the pyramid scheme all lost out. You know, and another example is the real estate crash. You have all these people that are at the beck and call of these sleazy ass bankers that I worked alongside for 10, 12 years who don't give a shit about the average person. They don't care about you. Like, don't get it twisted. Have no sympathy for these people. They literally have their internal systems and their loopholes to take what you do and work hard. You know, you work very hard for your money. You go to work almost every single day. You get a paycheck. You feed your kids. These people are figuring out schemes while you're working and earning hard-earned dollars. They're figuring out schemes to make it so they're not making a fucking payment. They're actually living off of your inability to see what they're doing. And it's all a loophole. So I don't want to get too deep into that because it's another story for another day. But I think, you know, we can go over, personally, you and I, we can go over some of the documents and the connections. But I guess for now, it's just taking the word of this internal investigation as well as what the Justice Department's reported multiple times.
Excellent. So let me ask you, like, how, you know, we were talking earlier about this idea of like where, you know, some of the right-leaning folks say Obama created ISIS, and we're dissecting why.
Trump specifically does that.
Yeah, and we're dissecting why those kind of statements are made. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a statement like that is made, right? Can anyone specifically find direct? I mean, you probably can, but can anyone prove that Obama created ISIS? No, but can you prove that John McCain has pictures with terrorists in the Middle East and that, you know, one being al-Baghdadi, the future leader of ISIS? Can you prove that? Absolutely. You know, that's all there. So like, you look at it, what did they do while they were in power? Well, Obama's State Department under Hillary Clinton knew about what different terrorist organizations were doing through a corporation like Ericsson. They knew Ericsson was dealing with terrorist-sponsored states. They knew that literally money is exchanged between terrorists and Ericsson to further Ericsson's business interest. And so,
sorry to interrupt you. In one of those documents where there was exchanges happening, it stated something to the effect of they were actually giving them, and correct me if I'm wrong here, they're giving them funds in order to help them with their telecommunication structure. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So you think about countries, like the countries listed, right? All the regime change that took place. You had Sudan, you have Libya, you have, I mean, Iran. Let's not get too started with them too much, because so Iran Iran's the creator of Hezbollah, right? But let me just cover a task force just to bring people brevity and understand that like there is things that are happening. Just because it's not being reported and just because the mainstream media doesn't want to tell you about it doesn't mean things aren't happening. For example, there's two John Durhams. There's the father and then there's the son. And so you have the son, John Durham. He's actually the director of Joint Task Force Vulcan. And so Joint Task Force Vulcan was enabled through Trump, but it also ties back to a executive order put in place by Obama. The point being is that the scope of the investigation that John Durham Jr. has under his Joint Task Force Vulcan, which was essentially started in August 2019, but it was just a carryover of something that was created in October of 2017. And so what really matters pertaining to specifically John Durham Jr. is that while his father is heading up the special counsel to go after Michael Sussman and Newstar and Rodney Jaffe, which is another thread that I don't know if we'll get to tonight, but the intellectual property is right here, literally showing you guys and showing everybody, the world. This is the intellectual property. This is basically the technology that sits in between when a FISA warrant is issued and the receiving of that order. So there's a DNS system, and that system is intellectual property tied to Rodney Lance Jaffe, who's Tech Executive 1 in the indictment. Why that matters so much is because, and I don't want to get too far off track here, but I'll just mention this really quickly. Amazon Web Technologies is listed 52 times in this specific patent. Now, why that matters is because what Rodney Jaffe is being investigated for by the special counsel is fraud, right? So Jaffe has this IP, this intellectual property that ties to FISA and the issuing of FISA warrants. And essentially what happens is the companies switch hands over time. And because the IP is tied to Jaffe, the person, he's able, well, he's not supposed to, but he was essentially continuing to use that technology through and for back channel for the FBI, quarterbacking for the CIA. So there's a lot more to it, but pertaining specifically to, I guess we'll get back to Erickson. I guess we'll get back to a question you have so I can reiterate or maybe cover it again. I'm bouncing around a little bit.
Yeah, so I was wondering now, in terms of ISIS, like could you give us a little detail about? Do you know how much money exactly was given to them by Ericsson for building
let's
telecommunications infrastructure?
So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. In terms of, I guess we'll go to the report specifically. So you have 45 million in Vietnam between 2012 and 2015. You have China between 2000 and 2016, 31.5 million. And again, remember, this is like documented, provable evidence that shows funneling of illicit bribes and money. And so where you can just tell how bad all of this is just reading what's written here in the summary from December 6, 2019. So it says, a multinational telecommunications company headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden, has agreed to pay total penalties of more than $1 billion, which is the highest fine ever levied on any corporation ever, to resolve the government's investigation into violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, arising out of the company's scheme to make and improperly record tens of millions of dollars in improper payments around the world. This includes a criminal penalty of over $520 million to, of course, $540 million goes to the SEC. So if the SEC is corrupt, and there are insider lawyers working on both sides of the deal, then I mean, there's no way to prove this right now, but looking at the cases that funneled through the Southern District of New York all around the same time, you have, and I'll go over them. You have the Wiener evidence collection. You have the Clinton Foundation investigation, which actually started in the Eastern District under Loretta Lynch's mafioso connections to her lawyers and legal friends. Southern District of New York, Epstein evidence collection, Ghislaine Maxwell case, Trump tax returns. So in essence, they investigated Trump so that they could make sure nobody affiliated or associated with the executive department could get any sort of prying eyes on what's happening.
So hang on, let me get this straight. So you're saying that they launched the false investigation on Trump's tax returns, so then Trump would not be able to put anybody on investigating them? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Because that's just blocking and tackling. That's what they do. So
could you explain why, just for the listeners, could you explain why?
Yeah. So I'll go to my Twitter data because I've been kicked off Twitter so many times. We'll just go basically ES. So I try to stay away as much as possible from Dominion Smart, because you got to realize this is a game, right? And so the more you have to sometimes play by their rules, right? Twitter doesn't want you talking about election fraud. I think that's horseshit, and obviously I don't want to abide by that. But the only way to build up a following is essentially what we're doing, which is utilizing brave people like Whiplash, their platforms, allowing us to go on their platforms, put this information out, and connect with journalists like yourself to start to slowly get the information out there. So you asked a question specifically, how do they do this blocking and tackling? And I'm going to show you, this is an image. These are the specific congressmen who investigated ES&S, Dominion, as well as other voting machines, right? When did they investigate them? They investigated them after the report by Bob Mueller, right? Who's another corrupt individual. But you ask how they block and tackle. So here is, I actually opened the signature. So you saw who signed on it. December 6th, which is actually really interesting because I think that's the exact same date of the Ericsson. December 6th, exact same day as the Ericsson filing that was put out publicly, which is interesting. I don't know if that has any correlation, but here it says, we are writing to request information regarding Staple Street Capital Group, LLC, Staple Street, investment in Dominion Voting Dominion, one of three election technology vendors responsible for developing, manufacturing, maintaining the vast majority of voting machines and software in the United States, and to request information about your firm's structure and finances as it relates to this company. So anybody who wants to then in Congress or in other institutions investigate specifically Dominion or voting machines or anything of the ilk, they can't do so because they're going to direct you to Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Mark Pecan, and Ron Wyden. And those corrupt politicians, Ron Wyden not being as bad as the rest, but essentially just as bad, they're going to tell you, yeah, sorry, that's internal investigation. We can't give you information on that. So they're blocking anyone else from also investigating who would actually investigate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm trying to understand though Trump's tax returns and how they relate to investigations.
So the Southern District of New York were the ones who investigated Ericsson. So that whole time the Justice Department is.
So basically, the Southern. Sorry, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's insane corruption. I get it.
But so basically, by essentially launching an investigation against Trump. And the fact that this is happening in the Southern District of New York, you said, correct?
Yep.
And so
the Clinton investigation, Clinton Foundation investigation, actually started under the Eastern District of New York, which is Brooklyn. John Durham Jr. who actually served in the Eastern District of New York. Not going to go into specifics of the details of all of that, but all of this ties together and connects. And so it's a matter of getting the public to be informed. Just to give you some more information on the Eastern District of New York, because you're requesting and asking. So the company, specifically another law firm, right? It's called Hogan Lovells. They're deeply entrenched in the Clinton Foundation, Saudi Arabian donations. They're the ones who initialed patents for SpamTrack, which were eventually abandoned, but the IP was used in Hillary's private email system. Essentially what they do is they take spam and they label spam as essentially only certain computers and certain systems will be able to tell that this isn't spam, but to the rest of the world, it's spam. So your security companies, we're going to have to start really questioning what our security companies do. Your McAfee, CrowdStrike's a shit show, but what they're actually providing as a service is just lip service. And the facts will bear through attribution and scientific proof through DARPA. But to answer your question pertaining to how entrenched all of these people are, you have Hogan Lovells, which is another law firm that worked out the deal that we're talking about. So getting that portability contract that through the FCC under Obama. Are you following that? Or so that was filed through this law firm right here, as in conjunction with Perkins Coie, in conjunction with Rodney Joffe. So November 28th, 2014, you have an ex parte, which is basically like I'm not going to tell you that there's this hearing, but you got to show up to it. It's horseshit. Anyways, Newstar Incorporated Representative Lisa Hook, President and CEO, Leonard Kennedy, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, Robert Strickland, Chief CTO, Rodney Joffe, that's Tech Executive 1, Senior Vice President, Senior Technologist, and Fellow, so he's all three of those things, Terry Claffey, Senior Policy Advisor. So at the end of reading all this, you get the Steptoe and Johnson law entity, law firm, Michael Sussman, who's a cybersecurity and representative and partner at Perkins Coie, and then Michelle Farquhar of Hogan Lovells. Collectively, all of these people are Neustar under the FCC case, right? So the contract being awarded to Telcordia. All these people who are, it's gonna come to bear very soon, are connected and very corrupt. So when you go to look at who's involved in the Eastern District of New York, I'll just give you a quick list from my notes. You have Loretta Lynch, who was made partner while working with Washington headquartered international law firm Hogan and Harston LLP, which becomes Hogan Lovells, from March 2002 through April 2010. The firm would curiously change its name to Hogan and Lovells US LLP in May of 2010, 1 month after Loretta Lynch's departure. So I explain here in my notes that we should all look into further as to why the name change happened. Cheryl Mills worked as an associate. She's also someone who worked on the Clinton Foundation, especially their board of directors. So she worked as an associate at the Washington law firm of Hogan and Harston. While there, she represented school districts seeking to achieve racial integration per Brown v. Board of Education, which ties into the 14th Amendment. We'll talk about that another day. Mills was also mixed up in Vince Foster's suicide and the Whitewater scandal. Are you familiar at all with Whitewater?
Yes, I am.
You are? Okay, awesome. Most people aren't. So a lot of what happened with Whitewater was a complete cover-up, right? Monica Lewinsky was a complete cover-up. She's a fraud, right? They used the Monica Lewinsky scandal as a means to cover up for the illicit banking deals that the Clintons were doing in Arkansas, specifically Mena, Arkansas, cocaine trafficking. You name it. Like the list is very, very broad in terms of the illicit and illegal things that are tied to the Clintons. I think you're familiar a little bit with how many people have been killed. Either tied to the Clintons or.
Let me just one thing that I want to again just kind of so I understand wrap my head around. So essentially, they're hitting. Are you saying that they're hitting Trump and his administration with a barrage of lawsuits in order to prevent themselves from being?
I'll even go a step further. I'll go even a step further. The Mueller investigation was a sham investigation. That was a complete cover up. And
draw attention away from really what's happening and to prevent further investigation into what's happening.
So a lot of the leaks, the quote unquote leaks that happened under Obama's administration, he passes laws essentially from 2011 dating to particularly to patents and patent law. It's the biggest intellectual property law change that's ever occurred in 75 years. So that happens under Obama in 2011. What you have to understand is at that point, a lot of people are looking at like Bill Clinton, Hillary, all these people that are tied to them and associated and affiliated with them. While I will say at the same time that they're corrupt and very evil, right? I'm also going to preface that by saying a lot of good people got pulled into this mess. And so at this point, I would assume, I would surmise that John Durham has a lot of people that are under indictment that are probably going to have to at some point either cooperate or bite the bullet, because this has to come to an end at some point. You can't continue to allow this illicit activities to go on and just have it be unfettered. So to answer your question pertaining to specifically, are they doing something to prevent Trump from doing what he should have done as president? Absolutely. They spied on him while he was a U.S. citizen. They used Neustar's technology to do so. Rodney Joffe's IP, which is fraud. So now anyone associated or affiliated with Rodney Joffe has to now prove that they're not associated specifically with his fraud, right? So just like guilty by association in terms of actual guilt, criminal culpability, Durham's investigation through Kevin Kleinsmith, are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not actually.
All right, give me just a second. So let's do this because this is important. So Kevin Kleinsmith, here's an image. I don't know if you can see it very well. Kevin Kleinsmith essentially pleaded guilty, right? But he pleaded guilty not only in the Justice Department, but also in the executive. So he pled guilty under two offices. So that's really important in terms of future indictments, right? He's already admitted to his culpability in altering technology and emails to allow for a FISA to go around the NSA. So can you see this image here?
Yes, I can. Yep.
So on the very far left, and this is, I'm just going to give a shout out to this person, Optimistic Khan. She's Optimistic Conservative, J.E. Dyer. She does an amazing job, amazing work. You should definitely go to her blog and read almost all of her work. It's very, very good. But let's focus here right now on this image. So I was going to try to go into this on another day, but it's okay because you're asking, and hopefully I can provide the information in a good enough manner. So this is how information flows from left to right. This red area here is the NSA's database, right? So as this image says, the data populates, is tagged for security access, structured polls, queries, etc. IT level admins, or people with privy access like third-party servicers, can access this information. But specifically, the NSA controls the information here. So what ends up happening is after it's funneling out to the different agencies like the NSA, DIA, CIA, National Counterterrorism Task Force, FBI, NSA, ODNI, all these institutions, right? They have to query the information through the NSA in its database. So what ended up happening was Rogers, while working under Obama's intelligence community, he's working for the NSA at the time. He catches on to a lot of the hacking, what they purport to be leaks. They claim that they're hacks, but they're actually leaks. And they're all tied to the executive office of the president. So to summarize, Newstar and data pulls happen on the far left end. So what came out through Snowden's leaks was that the NSA is this terrible organization. And I mean, there are a lot of corrupt people in the NSA, don't get me wrong. But the point that I'm getting at is the CIA can access your data and information through third-party servicers as well as terms of service. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, Google, so on and so forth. It's been brought up multiple times. But it would make the most sense for the CIA, who hates the NSA, you know, they're going to battle against each other. Essentially, what the CIA wants to do is get rid of the NSA. So they put Rogers in that position right after the leaks happen with Snowden. They essentially get all this terrible press about the NSA. The NSA is doing all these things, and they absolutely are. A lot of what the NSA does is unconstitutional. No one's questioning that. But the point that I think should be emphasized is Snowden's leaks only were directed towards the telecoms. They didn't talk about Newstar. They didn't talk about Telcordia. They didn't talk about these third-party servicers that actually work in between, are basically going around NSA to provide wiretaps for domestic spying. In a lot of ways, it could be actual legitimate law enforcement work, but it's unconstitutional. So the best way to put it is here you have Newstar on this end. They're taking data that doesn't equate or make sense once it's going through NSA's database, and they're manufacturing data. So what I put here is Georgia Tech / DARPA Enhanced Attribution Team was accessing EOP, that's the Executive Office of the President, data. But the key here is they were accessing the data from 2014 to 2017. So in my estimation, that would indicate more of a cleanup job than it would indicate any sort of cybersecurity work. So what I go on to state is that they, being the criminals, needed to manufacture evidence on short notice, plus link the already incriminating data regarding Uranium-1 and Benghazi. And so they had to attribute that data to someone. And because Rogers isn't going to go along with what they're saying, neither is Flynn, they have to basically pin the blame on whoever the Republican candidate is. So had it been not Trump, someone else, Chris Christie, God forbid, Jesus Christ. But just stating, had it been any other Republican nominee, they would have pinned an FISA investigation on that person as well. So I think a lot of people, maybe even myself, you kind of forget the fact that Trump was a normal citizen, not a president, when he was spied upon. The excuse to spy on him was so that they could literally offshoot what the crimes that they did regarding Uranium-1. Because Rod Rosenstein was the one who investigated 10X. So he investigated Uranium-1. He happens to then go on to investigate Trump. Isn't that, he puts Bob Mueller, he volunteers Bob, appoints Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller was the first one who took uranium to Russia in 2008. And that's shown in the WikiLeaks dumps. So I guess, to reiterate, Kevin Klein-Smith and his data, he manipulates. And if you look at his tweets, his texts, he's literally saying, I hate this country. I forget the specific words. I don't want to misattribute what he says, even though he's a piece of shit. But point being, I don't want to misstate what he says, but he manipulates data. He manipulates evidence on behalf of the CIA, on behalf of the FBI, for the CIA. And he's through that, when you connect it to Georgia Tech and the data, it gives you a complete picture if you don't have the additional data through NSA. So they were framing Trump to avoid the investigations into their own illicit and unwarranted leaks and actions. So there's a lot to unpack there, but it's all proven in the FISA, and it's all proven, except for I won't say the hacks are proven, but it's very salacious and it doesn't get better the deeper you dig. The point that matters is John Durham has that data now. So it's incumbent upon us, the people, to, even though, John Durham's doing what he needs to do, and then his son is doing even more, protecting us, we need to hold now politicians and then these corporations, the news agencies, the sham third-party servicers, we need to hold them accountable. And if we don't, then they're just going to continue to do whatever the hell they please, meanwhile trampling all over our rights. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, that totally makes sense. And the one thing I would just kind of make sure the listeners understand is that video that we referenced that we can't play on right now because the audio doesn't seem to be working is very important for you to watch, because once you watch that with everything that Michael's just stated over the last hour or so, will make a whole lot of sense.
Absolutely. And so just because I know I jumped around quite a bit. So the focus starts and ends with Ericsson. Getting the information out pertaining to Ericsson is extremely important. So what we're doing through Plus Ultra is we're going to provide action reports that make it so point blank, easily understood. And then what we want to have the public do is go around to different politicians, different people in office, different people running for office, and say to them, hey, you're running for public office here or here, right? Do you think that it's good or bad? Obviously that's not a good question to ask, but here's what's happening with Ericsson. They control our 911 portability services. The other contract that was company that was potentially able to even get this contract is Newstar. They're currently being indicted, and not them indicted, but specifically technology pertaining to that corporation. I just have to watch my words before, even though this is all coming out at some point will be revealed. I don't know the specific culpability of each individual, right? But what I can surmise from the data, from the patents, from the intellectual property right now is that these two organizations, Ericsson and Newstar, their technology, their information, their systems were used on one end of the spectrum to elicit funding, briberies, overthrows for governments in Egypt, Lebanon, all these countries, and benefiting the CIA, killing people, supporting terrorism. Yet we're defunding everything that has to do with Russia because they're dealing with whatever they're doing with Ukraine. What Trump says is that the servers are in Ukraine, right? The CrowdStrike servers. And so that's super interesting with pertaining to CrowdStrike. And it's a little complex, but the things that I think matter most, again, is that you have Newstar, the one portability company that is essentially involved in the FISA abuse and spying on our president, right? I would actually honestly say that the technology leads to even worse through Amazon Web Services. So just to give you this little bit of recap, so the technology that Amazon uses and cites through this patent basically holds up the infrastructure and under the underlying underbelly of the internet. Newstar is like the traffic cop that directs top-level domains, DNS root servers. It basically is the in-between for all these really important aspects of internet infrastructure. And then you have the Amazon Web Services that utilize and specifically cite Joffe's patent. So I'm just going to read this quick image here. So if the obligation of the honesty and fair dealing is breached, then any patent that issues would be unenforceable due to what the law calls inequitable conduct. What this means is that there would be no exclusive rights and no ability to prevent others from infringing, because it would be as if no patent ever existed. So the CIA never likes to have a trail or track to what it does illicitly or otherwise. So the best way to do that would be to conduct its business in plain sight. If you look at this image, these are some of the government agencies. There's 2,300 of them that use Amazon Web Services. So you have Facebook, you have the NSA, you have majority of police, law enforcement officials, agencies, etc. You have the most important of which, the CIA, who never seems to be involved in any of the leaks. No leaks of theirs ever get out, but somehow everybody else's leaks get out. Nothing to see there. Then you have Twitter, which is going to kick and scream to the end of days to not allow Elon to take over, because a lot of their data is going to show a lot of the illicit action that they've been carrying out for years, which includes spying on domestic citizens in the United States, as well as other countries. You have the FBI, United States Department of Homeland Security. So to summarize, we could either allow Amazon, which does contracting for the Federal Election Commission. It handles their databases. It handles the DNC, and it handles the RNC. So it has all that data and all that information all on their servers. They are clearly contracted with the CIA. And the question would become, could anyone, even a regular citizen, you or I, could we actually purchase Twitter? No matter how much money we had, wouldn't we need a security clearance to buy Twitter? If they're contracted with all these agencies, would you not need a top-level security clearance to buy Twitter? Elon Musk has a top security clearance through SpaceX, because he puts CIA satellites through the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. He puts those spy satellites that belong to the CIA in space. So he has that top-level security clearance. So no average citizen could just go and buy Twitter. He's one of the very few people that could actually do it. So then the question becomes, what the hell's going on there? Why is that the case? And hopefully Elon helps us get the answer to that, but we'll see.
How come we're trusting a foreign company with our 911 services? Don't we have the American companies that can handle that?
Well, we did. We had Newstar, which, for whatever reason, I don't know what specific. It's interesting that John McAfee and the Clintons are trending right now, but let me stay on track. So yeah, that's a great question. Should we have a foreign company, in charge of this? Absolutely not. But what you'll come to find out as we'll continue to put information out there is that Obama and the Clintons, even, I don't want to just overemphasize Democrats, but like as of late, they're the fucking shit show. But to be honest with you, pertaining to the foreign company operating our 911 services, no, that's insane. That should not be happening at all. And the fact that they're doing business with ISIS and that their own internal investigations have shown that with receipts, that's fucking insane.
I mean, when did this whole trend start? Because it wasn't like this before, back, I guess, 20 years ago.
It depends on the history that you wanted to look at.
Well, I mean, in terms of taking these valuable, resources that we have, like our, 911 calls and all that stuff, and then
I'll bite with that. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's insane. How long has that been going on for? The privatization of the internet has been going on since the 1996 Telecommunications Act under Bill Clinton. And so I don't say that just to be coy or, funny, but literally that's where it started. So he starts wanting to privatize the internet. Obama finishes the job off. But what neither of the morons had at all ever thought in a million years was that the military databases that the military uses on their top level domain isn't tied to any of the private ones. So it's the first and it's the last. And essentially what a lot of people, I think, in the Q ethos and community always heavily focus on the military taking care of everything. The military is the only way. Yeah, it is through the data. And so the data that's there, whatever that data is available, is going to be on the .mil top level domain. And so I'm veering off quite a bit here, but I'll put out a thread tomorrow pertaining to ICANN, and we'll explain more about how Obama gave away the internet. And really what happened is Trump's election threw off Obama and caused him to make a lot of missteps. And those missteps happened specifically between October to November until Trump gets into office. But it's literally some of the most salacious things that you would ever understand or comprehend, including getting rid of complete laws, CFR laws, codified laws. He just gets rid of them because, he's got to cover up for his illicit activities. But yeah, to answer your question, should foreign corporations be at all involved in domestic infrastructure, operations, and military important operations, such as technology that's needed to carry out different operations? Hell no. No foreign corporation should be involved in that process at all.
And
think about it.
That kind of started really around Clinton's time.
Well, it goes back further than that. It goes back to, it goes very, very far back. But if we want to just go back to JFK, that's like a good barometer on just how shitty things were getting. Why aren't the JFK documents declassified? That's something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, right? I would tell you that it's probably because it'll show that the CIA and the FBI were complicit in the assassination of the president, right? But there's accountability is just not a thing in this country, because what corporations, their whole point is essentially, they started off, corporations were a good thing. They were supposed to be something that empowered citizens and allowed for the people to essentially use this vehicle of limited liability in partnership with other U.S. persons to create this corporation that comes together for the common good of the people. It's supposed to do good things, which will allow it to essentially get tax incentives and tax breaks. And then we've veered so far off that road and that path. Corporations can do whatever the fuck they want, and including killing people, and they get away with it. And that's got to stop. Like, that absolutely has to stop. You can't continue. So we got a lot of things that we're going to be working on, a lot of things we're going to plan to do, but none of that gets done without the power of the people. Like, we need average, everyday citizens, not people with privy access. We may need some information pertaining to clearances and how you file certain lawsuits, but a lot of this is going to be done from the ground up, right? Because if the average Joe can't do this, then the system's broken and it needs to be rebuilt anyways. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Yep. So we've been going for a little bit more than an hour. Is there anything you wanted to say kind of in closing, or?
No, I mean, I hope this has been beneficial. I hope that people have taken a lot from this information. I know it's a lot. We'll do these more often. I want to thank Whiplash. So Whiplash is offering and allowing me to utilize his platform. So what we're going to be doing is utilizing other platforms as well to put out these action reports through Plus Ultra. And then we're going to be putting out essentially action items and calls to action to try to get the public to get involved and show their politicians, show the people running for office these reports that we'll put out. And none of it will be hyperbole. None of it will be based on conspiracy, right? It's all fact. And it's absolutely imperative that we get our politicians to start being held accountable. If you can't stand up to a corporation that funds ISIS, but you want to stand for Ukraine, you need to absolutely be kicked the hell out of office, like ASAP. And I don't care what side of the fence you're on, whether you're left, right, Democrat, doesn't matter, right, Republican, right. Everybody is screaming at each other from both sides, and we have to build a bridge to connect the two sides, because the average person has way more in common with each other than these corrupt politicians at the top. So
I couldn't agree more with that. For real. Like, I think all the division and all that stuff. Honestly, I think that's part of their. I know that's part of their game, where they keep us distracted with these like pitting citizens against each other. Because when you're so distracted, just like they were trying to do with Trump, by hitting him with a ton of lawsuits and, false accusations and all that stuff. It took the attention off of the real corruption that was happening. So that's absolutely essential that the people start coming together and, start ignoring these petty differences.
And isn't it bizarre that this insane connection comes out pertaining to Ericsson, this internal investigation? They're so integral and so important to a lot of countries' national security, literal national security, and it's not reported on at all because we're hearing about the war in Ukraine every single day, because we're hearing about leaks that shouldn't be happening through the Supreme Court that are. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? Why are these things happening? Is it to distract, or is it because
there's so much tension in there? Of course, it's to distract because there's so much tension in there. You have half the country yelling and screaming about a stolen election. You have documentaries coming out, every other week about a stolen election. People are upset. People see the country marching towards socialism, Marxism, which I guess fits their agenda because, the more control you have over people, with the talk of this digital currency and controlling what's in people's pockets. And if they misspeak, they get punished, they get timeouts, just like in China. I mean, this just all feels like part of the same agenda towards authoritarianism, so they could keep getting away with their nonsense because it's come to a point now where the people are onto their game, and the next step of this is indictments being handed out to some of these bad players. But
exactly. So the idea is to keep pressing them, right? They're the ones who are cornered. They're the ones who are boxed in. So we don't relieve the pressure. We put our foot down on their necks and finish this thing absolutely as quickly as we can. Until we start the class action lawsuits, the removal of their assets, because anyone can continue doing something illicitly and illegally if they're allowed to do so. So if you have the financing and you're a corrupt organization, cabal, entity, or whatever it is, you're going to continue to do what you do if you're allowed to do the illegal and illicit things you do. So if you can't cut that entity, the snake essentially, off from its funding, you're not going to cripple it. This is going to allow us to literally cripple their systems and their entire database and everything that they do. And it just starts with people doing the right thing and getting the information out.
Thank you, Michael.
Right.
This was amazing information, and I definitely look forward to doing more of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess Elon just tweeted something about something interesting about dying under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah, he was talking about. I think he was talking about. He was criticizing Russia and sending some, I guess, satellites to Ukraine, and then he joked. He said, "If I die under mysterious circumstances, it's been good knowing you."
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. Again, a lot of people don't like Elon Musk. I think you should definitely give him way more rope in terms of why are there so many disinformation campaigns literally directed and headed right towards his head. And so then you have to ask yourself, sure, he's clearly involved with a lot of things, but if he's not standing up for democracy and freedom, then we're toast in terms of the technology he's enabling and allowing the average person to be able to surmise and use. So him doing what he did, Trump doing what he did, and a lot of very good people, because again, that John Durham task force Vulcan, that includes literally tens of thousands of agents all around the United States in every district. And so they're not reporting on this because they don't want you to know that there is something going on and that these people are very, in a lot of hot water. It's just a matter of us pressing the issue and doing it in a legal and lawful way. And I'm telling you, the intelligence apparatus, the services that are in the background helping us out, they'll continue to do so, and it will become more and more apparent. These people are amazing people within military services, military men and women. They want nothing more than this to come to an end just as quickly, if not even faster than a lot of the public. But they have to respect the rule of law. They have to respect the chain of command, and they have to do things lawfully. And that's how this whole operation has been carried out so far. So if they didn't do it that way and they just went and threw everyone in prison, what would stop the next president or the next person from doing the same exact thing to the other side? I'm glad we did this, and hopefully we'll be doing this much more regularly, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. God bless, and good night.
Good night, everyone.